What makes someone fit to be America's face in a foreign capital? A strong resume or a steady temperament? That question drove an intense confirmation hearing for the president's ambassador pick. Here's the hearing, then the facts.
And I want to go to one comment from a 2018 radio interview where you called the European Union leadership the political diplomatic enemies of the United States of America. That's a direct quote. Now, if confirmed, you would lead the American presence in an EU country where Russian and Chinese influence demand our full attention, and where, out of the 27 EU member states, 23 are our NATO allies, including Slovakia. So how do you explain that, and how will you explain that to the European leadership and officials that you would have to deal with if you are confirmed in this position?
Yeah, thank you for that good question, Senator. I appreciate it. Yeah, that's 8 years ago, and the dynamics between the United States and the EU leadership has shifted quite a bit. Back then, there was a considerable hostility between American interests and American first policy and the EU response. In particular, what triggered that response was hearing then the leader of the EU, he was a spokesman from Italy, I forget his name, basically saying that the EU won World War II and the United States and Great Britain had nothing to do with it. Nigel Farage, of course, who was still a member of the EU Parliament, stood up and corrected a record. That was the kind of leadership we were facing at the time. There was resistance to increasing the NATO budget. There was resistance to American interests in economic aid to the region. But my record shows that I have worked well with them across the world. I've had no problem. In fact, I have deep connections, both today even, in the civil leadership and the military leadership across Western, Central, and Northern Europe.
Well, I was on this committee and in the United States Senate in 2018, and I didn't view the leadership of Europe as political and diplomatic enemies of the United States. And I don't think that approach was helpful then. I don't think it's helpful now. And I understand that you told the staff when you were being interviewed that you believe the EU is a rising rival, I quote, comparable to China, and that it would eventually create a standing army to challenge the United States. Is that what you believe? Do you really believe that?
It is clearly a goal of EU leadership. I'm a senator, I should know to press that button. It is the goal of the stated leadership of the EU, and they've been desirous of building their own EU army since 2002, when I was a planner in U.S. Army headquarters, Europe. And,
they have talked about. I have been in those discussions as well, Mr. Mastriano, sure. And I can tell you that nobody ever suggested that would be in lieu of the United States or in lieu of NATO and the cooperative effort that we have with our allies. And I can tell you that it was the NATO allies who came to our defense when we got attacked on 9/11. The only time Article 5 has been invoked.
I served with them in Afghanistan, side by side.
And so you should know better than to make those comments.
Especially lately, we're hearing more arguments out of the latest debate come from the EU that they want to have capability beyond the America, not to rely upon American readiness.
Well, and I can understand why, given some of the attacks from people like you in the United States that you've made against the EU.
I regret that mischaracterization, because my view is we do work better together. And I have served and bled on the battlefields with NATO allies for more than 30 years in my career, and I understand the importance of this alliance. But I don't want to see this most successful alliance in the history of the world, NATO, to fade away or be overshadowed by an EU army. I think that undercuts our international interests.
I haven't heard anybody at NATO suggesting that that's going to happen. So I think you're absolutely right. We do work better when we work together and we cooperate. And I would think somebody who served on the battlefield with those countries would know better than to make those kinds of statements. And I can tell you, as a diplomat representing the United States of America, you should absolutely know better.
Mr. Chairman, if I could respond,
if I could
please.
go on to Mr. Blaum. Lebanon is really at a critical turning point right now. I'm encouraged that there are direct negotiations between Lebanon and Israel. I think that's been long overdue. But one of the significant factors in ensuring that we can see peace ultimately in Lebanon, I think, is support for the Lebanese armed forces. So can you talk about whether you think, how important you think it is to continue to support the LAF?
Thanks for that question, Senator. Absolutely an important element of our negotiations, or of our facilitation of the negotiations between Israel and Lebanon, is that support for the LAF. The LAF has played an important role in counterterrorism and border security, all with the assistance of the United States. That's not to diminish that, there are issues with the LAF that we have to address, difficult issues. But the extent to which we're able to make progress on finding a way to replace Hezbollah in Lebanon and create a new future free of foreign domination in that country runs in some way through the LAF as well.
Mr. Mastriano, I look at your nomination and I have a real sense of sadness about it. And I'm going to tell you why. Your military record of service to the country and your sacrifice is really superb. And you went into that in your own statement, and I find so much to admire there, your own sacrifice and your family's sacrifice. And then in the middle of your comments, you kind of hinted, but then I got into politics. I had been respected in the military, but then I got into politics and people called me everything but a good man. I think you need to look in the mirror a little bit. Both my colleagues have pointed out evidences of things that you've said and people you've associated with that are highly, highly unusual. You've associated with anti-Semites and Holocaust deniers. You've associated with 9/11 conspiracy theorists. You've made comments about foreign leaders that are not diplomatic in quality. And you and I share a very special day in American history. We were both here on January 6, 2021. You engaged in repeated efforts before that day and since to challenge the integrity of the presidential election. And there's even some controversy about what exactly you were doing here on the Capitol that day. But there isn't any controversy about why you were here. You were here because you were urging Congress to reject the certification of the electoral results and to interrupt the peaceful transfer of power. And all of us who were here that day remember what it was like to be under attack with people who were trying to disrupt the peaceful transfer of power. I never served in the military, but I lived in a military dictatorship in Honduras when I was a missionary. And I know what dictators do, and I know what it is to undermine democratic institutions. And to my knowledge, now you can correct me if I'm wrong, to my knowledge, you've never retracted your belief that that election was somehow illegitimate. I was on the floor later in the day after the rioters were finally cleared, and I watched both of your state senators at the time, Senator Casey and Senator Toomey, when a non-Pennsylvanian challenged the Pennsylvania results. I believe it was a senator from Missouri. I watched both of your state senators absolutely shred the argument that there was anything wrong about the Pennsylvania election results. That they were insulted that a Missouri senator would challenge the integrity of the Pennsylvania elections. And they shredded that argument, just like courts have repeatedly shredded the argument. Am I wrong? Have you retracted the various conspiracies that you apparently have been laboring under with respect to the 2020 election?
I mean, Senator, what do you want me to address specifically? I've never been involved in conspiracies. The one thing I did before January 6th was be part of a hearing in Gettysburg, exercising our oversight per the U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 4.
But you were here on January 6th to urge Congress to
reject
it.
That is incorrect. That is incorrect. I was here to hear the president. I was here with my wife to hear the president of the United States speak. We didn't do anything illegal. We came, we saw, we left.
Okay, I think the record is going to demonstrate to the contrary.
No, sir, it does not.
But how about today? Will you accept the 2020 presidential
Joe Biden was certified.
Okay, no, I'm not saying certified.
The question is closed.
Was Joe Biden elected the president of the United States?
I have not been
by both.
I have not been a target or a subject of any criminal investigation related to this.
I'm not asking you about your criminal record.
Okay.
Just answer this question. Was Joe Biden elected president in 2020 by both the popular vote and the Electoral College?
Joe Biden was certified per the constitutional process. And I was not here to disrupt anything, Senator.
Well, I'm not asking you about that.
I came to hear our president
speak. Listen, here is the point.
Yes, sir.
I've never known a conspiracy theorist who just believed one conspiracy. Conspiracy theorists generally are gullible people. They might have master's degrees and PhDs, and you've got them. And the United States is invested in you to have those degrees. But somebody who will believe a conspiracy theory about 9/11 or the Holocaust or about the January 2020 election, they're gullible.
I don't subscribe to any of those conspiracies about 9/11 or the Holocaust.
You preach conspiracies about the 2020 election.
No,
Guess
sir.
what? That a fourth grader with common
That's
sense
inaccurate,
would
Senator.
find ridiculous.
All they did is hold a hearing per my constitutional responsibility as a
you did-
committee chair in Pennsylvania, per Article
All
1,
I did
Section
was
4.
hold a hearing. Oh, but forget that I came to the Capitol on January 6th
To hear
as
our
it was
president speak.
under attack and urged people to reject a peaceful transfer
I
of
gave no
power.
speeches. I came to hear the
You
president speak.
can't erase your record now,
No,
Mr.
sir. There's no erasing it.
Let me ask one last question.
Facts are stubborn
Mr.
things.
Mr. Perez. Mr. Perez, do we have a trade surplus or a trade deficit with Brazil?
We have a trade surplus, sir.
A massive trade surplus, correct?
Yes, Senator.
So when President Trump imposed tariffs on Brazil, saying, I'm doing this Liberation Day tariff because nations are ripping us off, we sell a lot more to Brazil than they sell to us. Yesterday, we put a 25% tariff on Brazil, and they say they're going to reciprocate against us. If they reciprocate at 25%, who loses more, the U.S. or Brazil?
Thank you for the question, Senator. Obviously, this is a new tariff that was implemented yesterday at some point overnight while I was asleep.
Yeah.
I did read the articles this morning.
Yeah, and you've had nothing to do with it.
And USTR has made their decisions. I will learn more about it over the next several weeks.
Okay, well,
I'm
let me
sure,
just, I'm going to say mathematically, if we have a trade surplus with Brazil, that means we're selling more to them than they're selling to us. If we put a 25% tariff on them and then they put an equal tariff on us, it's the United States that has the most to lose. So we'll not only see inflation go up on products coming from Brazil, but the tariff put on U.S. manufacturers because we sell more to Brazil than others is going to hurt our own businesses more than Brazil's businesses will be hurt.
I want to move on now to religious pluralism. Mr. Mastriano, you have spoken many times about the Christian identity of the United States and that separation of church and state is a myth. So I just have a simple question for you, and if you could look at me when you answer this. Do you think U.S. political leaders should all be Christian?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. So having spent more than 30 years in the uniform of leading men and women of all creeds, all races, from every corner of Pennsylvania and every corner of the United States, my record stands clear that I uphold and defend the Constitution and its values. And in fact, Pennsylvania was founded by
So
William
I just
Penn.
want a simple yes or no. Do you think U.S. political leaders should be Christian? It's a simple yes
I
or no.
believe in the rule of law and that religious liberty applies to every American.
So
why our country was founded.
I'm not sure why you won't answer the question in that way, but what I do want to say is that I do find it deeply problematic that you won't look me in the eye and say that leaders in the United States, we are a pluralistic country, don't have to be Christian. And so
Madam,
leaders can come from any faith, Judaism,
Of course.
Islam, Hinduism. And if you were to be confirmed, you would be in charge of an embassy, sir, that will have a diverse staff. You will be meeting with diplomatic leaders from every race and faith from all around the world. And I just want to be sure that you'll be able to reconcile your worldview with the responsibilities of your role. But
And
I'll
Senator, I would look in the eye and repeat it in simpler language rather than constitutional phrasing.
Thank you.
We are absolutely a pluralistic society, and I have worked for non-Christians in the military and the government, and I've had them working for me. I've had people from Saudi
That wasn't
Arabia,
the question,
Iraq,
though. The
Kuwait.
question was, do you think leadership should only be Christian? But we're going to move on to some other things with my time left. In October 2022, your wife said at one of your campaign events that the two of you probably love Israel more than a lot of Jews do. So I have some other things I want to add. So yes or no, do you agree with that statement? You love Israel more than a lot of Jews? Yes or no,
But
please?
both Rebbe and I have a deep love and appreciation for the Jewish people and the
I
nation of Israel.
appreciate that. So can you confirm that you've repeatedly compared things to the Holocaust, such as abortion or your loss to Governor Shapiro? Just a yes or no, have you compared those things to the Holocaust?
I've been working closely with the Jewish community for Senate Bill 127 in Pennsylvania to
We've
institute
seen the
Holocaust
statements.
education across the state. And I think any use of comparisons is unwise.
So you're saying you didn't make these
No,
statements?
I think it diminishes, and today I would not do that.
So
They have
you
since-
made the statements, but you're renouncing the statement.
There was a social media post that I would not post today. I think anything that uses the Holocaust to try to make a modern comparison is unwise.
Well, I appreciate that because you will be representing the United States and Slovakia, where nearly 69,000
Yep.
Slovak Jews were murdered during the Holocaust, over 75% of the entire Slovak Jewish population. And so we have to be sure that you will represent this country. We know that you've maintained a relationship with Andrew Torba, founder of extremist social media platform Gab. He's a Gab became notorious after the gunman who murdered 11 worshipers at Pittsburgh's Tree of Life Synagogue posted his manifesto there. And so despite his documented history of anti-Semitism, the rhetoric, the Holocaust denialism, your campaign paid Gab for promotional services. I'm going to finish with this for now. You can denounce your past associations with anti-Semites. You can point to your support of Israel. But for me, I'm not sure that neither excuses you or erases your record. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Rosen. And let me just say at the outset that I share all the concerns expressed, Mr. Mastriano, by my colleagues about your past record and conduct. I'm going to focus my questions here to Ambassador Blom, and I appreciate the chance to get together with you yesterday. And I want to start today with the issue I started with yesterday, which is Syria. I think, Mr. Ambassador, we both agree that the current moment holds promise, but it's also very precarious. Is that a quick summary of where we are?
That is accurate, Senator.
And I was glad to see the administration lift the state sponsor of terrorism recently as part of the NATO summit. And as you know, Senator Shaheen and many of us worked to lift the sanctions on Syria here, and I assume you support all of those actions.
Yes, I do, Senator.
And I will say that when we lifted those sanctions, we included report language making clear that we believe that success in Syria requires that the government include elements from all parts of Syrian society, Alawites, Kurds, Druze, Christians. You would agree that the success of the future of Syria depends on making sure all those groups are included in its governance, would you not?
Absolutely, Senator. It is a multi-ethnic society.
I will say, you know, the late Senator Graham and I spent a lot of time together making sure that the United States did not abandon our commitment to the Syrian Kurds, the SDF, because they have been the tip of the spear with us in the fight against ISIS. Isn't that right?
That is correct.
So one of the concerns that was raised in this sort of shaky moment was the continued presence of Israeli forces in Syria. And I think that there's been a sense within the administration and elsewhere that is not a productive thing to happen, to continue that presence in southern Syria. Is that a fair statement of the administration's concerns?
I think that is certainly one of the concerns that we have to address going forward. Yeah. Yes, Senator.
And isn't it the case just within the last 24 hours, President Trump asked Prime Minister Netanyahu to remove Israeli forces from Syria?
I'll let President Trump's statement speak for himself, but I think it's an issue on which we've been engaged diplomatically and we'll continue to be engaged diplomatically.
Well, I'm just reading from an article here where it's reporting that the president said to Prime Minister Netanyahu, you should redeploy out of Syria. Do you have any reason to dispute this article?
Absolutely not.
Okay. Let me ask you about the situation in the West Bank, because we've seen a continued rise in settler violence against Palestinians, working to push Palestinians off their lands. With this very extremist Netanyahu government, we've seen the complicity of the IDF in certain cases in pushing Palestinians off their land. What I want to ask you about specifically is nine American citizens who've been killed on the West Bank, either by settler violence or Israeli security forces just in the last 4 years. And I would, Madam Chair, like to just put into the record a letter that 31 senators sent to Secretary Rubio on March 5th on this topic.
Without objection.
Thank you. Are you aware of these deaths, killings of American citizens on the West Bank?
Yes, Senator, I'm aware of these cases.
Are you aware of the fact that there's been no accountability in any of these cases?
Senator, I believe that while we have to condemn any kind of acts of criminal violence in the West Bank from any party, we have a special obligation to follow up and ensure accountability and transparency in the case of American citizens. And if confirmed, it will certainly be a priority for me.
I appreciate that, because the letter we received back from both from Secretary Rubio on behalf of Secretary Rubio said the same thing, that the #1 priority of U.S. representation overseas is to protect U.S. citizens. But we have had no accountability with respect to these cases. And finally, I just want to raise with you a case that I mentioned yesterday. As we speak, we have an American citizen, Sama Safi, 20-year-old student being imprisoned in Israel, American citizen. Are you aware of her case?
Senator, I'm not aware of the specifics of that case.
Okay. Well, she has spoken about the abuse she's experienced. This is a trumped-up political charges against her, and I hope the U.S. government will work really hard to get her released, and I hope that happens between the time of this hearing and the time we consider these nominations on the Senate floor. Thank you, Senator Rosen.
Thank you, Senator Rosen. I want to follow up on Senator Van Hollen's questions about Syria and agree to applaud the commitment to lift the state sponsor of terrorism sanction against Syria. That has not yet happened, though the administration has indicated that they intend to do that. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Do you have any idea what the timeline to do that will be?
I believe from the date of the notification, there's a 45-day period required before it takes effect.
Okay, so we should see that happen sometime in the next month or so.
Yes, Senator.
I appreciated your comments and Senator Van Hollen's about the importance of power sharing in Syria with the various members of Syria's ethnic groups, with women in that country. There has been progress made, but clearly there's more that needs to be done. And one of the things that is important as we think about the lifting of sanctions is how to see more economic development in the country. Can you just talk about what the impact would be if the Development Finance Corporation or the Export-Import Bank would decide to back a project in Syria? What effect would that have on the confidence of other investors?
I think it would be very important. I think, look, the biggest challenge of the many challenges in front of Syria is to find an economic path forward to give people hope that this transition will result in better lives. The economy contracted 84% between 2012 and 2026 in Syria. It's been a devastating period for the country. So I think we have to do everything we can to try to bring economic opportunity to Syria as quickly as possible. And if confirmed, I'd look for any tools that we have available to us to try to promote that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to start out to talk a little bit about people-to-people programming. So given their track record of building a pathway to peace, there's long been strong bipartisan support in Congress for people-to-people programs between Israelis, Palestinians, and other Arab neighbors. But many of these programs have been frozen or canceled since the beginning of this administration. So Ambassador Blom, at a moment of violence, mistrust, instability in the region, efforts to strengthen people-to-people engagement, particularly between Israelis and Palestinians, are more important than ever. If confirmed, will you prioritize programs designed to advance Israeli-Palestinian peace-building efforts like MEPA or MERC?
Thank you very much for that question, Senator. I can say that with my experience over many years, including working directly on Israeli-Palestinian issues, I understand the strength that can come from people-to-people exchanges, often benefits that come after many years of such programming. They can pay off in a very long run.
Will you work to ensure that the Bureau has the resources and personnel to manage these important programs as well?
Senator, I will, within the broader parameters of our assistance programming at the department, work to look for opportunities where we can effectively deploy those kind of funding sources.
Well, I look forward to working with you and strengthening those partnerships. I believe that creates stability on the ground.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Nebraska is a national leader in ethanol production. By the way, this is the third committee I've got to talk about ethanol in, so I got one more to do. But this is actually, but I related into why it's important, so just so you know. So our biorefineries, it's not a stretch. No, we're going to get there. Our biorefineries produce over 2 billion gallons worth of ethanol each year, helping secure American energy independence while generating billions of dollars of to our economy and creating thousands of jobs. Frustratingly, though, American ethanol continues to see significant market access challenges in Brazil. That's how we tied it in, Mr. Chairman, just so you know. So since 2017, Brazil has sought to have preferential treatment for their ethanol exports into the United States, while at the same time limiting our ethanol exports to Brazil through tariff and non-tariff trade barriers. The result is that Brazilian exports our exports to Brazil of our ethanol has dropped from about 30% of our overall ethanol exports down to 1 or 2%. It's completely unacceptable. And that's why I applaud what the USTR did yesterday by announcing a 25% tariff on Brazilian goods, including ethanol, to address this unfairness. We need to take every step possible to make sure that our corn growers and biorefineries are having a level playing field around the world. Mr. Perez, if confirmed, what actions would you take to help restore fair access to American ethanol into Brazilian markets?
Thank you, Senator Ricketts, for that question. You're absolutely right. We are upside down when it comes to ethanol, and I'm no expert in ethanol, but I can tell you.
Well, I'm one, so I can help you.
That's why I said that. It is my understanding that the Brazilians tax us at about 18% on ethanol, and in reverse, we are taxing about 1.5% to 2%.
I think we were actually zero. I don't think we had any tariffs on their ethanol until yesterday.
Whether it's 1% or 0%, it's significantly less than the 18% that they are taxing us. There is a gap there, and it's not just in ethanol. I think there's a gap across energy, across infrastructure when it comes to the Brazilian-United States relationship. Part of that, in my opinion, has to do with exposure. If confirmed, if I'm able to make it down to Brazil and get boots on the ground, the relationships between the private sector, it's not just the government, the private sector inside the United States and the Brazilian government, the Brazilian private sector, the citizens of Brazil can be amplified, and that is one of my goals, to be able to get the boots on the ground and have those relationships so that we can start to amplify the business between Brazilians and Americans when it comes to ethanol. That is one of the gaps that I think are the largest, and hopefully soon we can make that gap shorter.
Great, I'm heartened to hear that. Mr. Anderson, in your remarks to Senator Daines, you mentioned that your number one priority was actually the scam centers in Cambodia, and I'm also heartened to hear that is one of your priorities. These scam centers, also known, I guess, as pig butchering work, they bring in victims to get their money, to put their money into these fraudulent schemes, investment schemes, and last year estimated to have cost Americans $10 billion. $10 $10 billion of people's livelihoods, their savings, their retirement funds. Some people have been completely destroyed by this. And it also includes the people that they have working the scam centers that are often victims themselves, being forced to work under brutal and terrible conditions. The Cambodian government has increased its effort to crack down on these scam compounds. And of course, the United States, through sanctions, asset seizures, and law enforcement operations, has also taken aggressive action. But these scam centers keep popping up. If confirmed, how will you work with Phnom Penh to continue to aggressively combat these scam centers? You've made your number one priority. Tell me, how do you think you're going to tackle it?
Yes, thank you, Senator. Obviously, it starts, one, with the optimism in the relationship that has been built over the past 2 years with Hun Manet. And the first step is the conversation of the realism of where Cambodia is on combating these scam centers and what Hun Manet is expecting to do in the future and work with the relationship on this. Obviously, we've seen President Trump enact a number of things over the past year. An executive order, OFAC has gone after things we have seized, $1 billion+ in Bitcoin. Additionally, this committee has passed out of the committee and then passed out of the Senate the SCAM Act, which is a great tool for not only highlighting but identifying new tools in the toolbox where we can pull levers. Sir, to bluntly answer your question, it's going to be boots on ground, getting my hands dirty, bringing in joint task force, working with a myriad of agencies. Not one agency has all of the tools, so it'll be State Department, Department of Justice, Department of War, and then our regional allies to really attack the scam centers. And then I believe if you attack the scam centers and eliminate that problem, you also see beneficial aspects on a number of other problems. It will eliminate a demand signal for human trafficking. Now, that won't solve the human trafficking issue in a singular aspect, but it will reduce the demand signal, and then we can start to work on beneficial aspects from there.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Priss, what are some of your top priorities when you get this job, and what's success look like at the end of your time there?
Well, thank you, Senator, for that question, and thank you for the very kind introduction and your continued friendship. I would break them down into 3 different priorities. I would say first would be the security of the United States and all the Americans that live inside of the United States, but it's not just those that live here in the mainland. I would say the employees that work and that serve this country in Brazil. It's my understanding we have a little over 1,000 employees that work within the American Embassy in Brazil, and their security is just as important to me as us here as we sit here today. Second would be diplomacy. I think there's a huge opportunity for us to increase diplomatic relationships with Brazil. We obviously have an election in Brazil that is upcoming here in the first week of October, and regardless of what that election shows, there's an opportunity for us to bridge that gap, and I believe I have the right skill set to be able to do that, assuming I get the opportunity to serve. And the last one would be trade. And we do have a trade surplus with Brazil, but nevertheless, and Senator Ricketts alluded to this earlier, there are some industries that have a significant gap. It's not just ethanol. I would say we have a problem in energy. Agriculture is a massive problem for us, specifically the beef trade between the United States and Brazil. And if confirmed, those are the 3 priorities that I will be focusing on as soon as I am able to hit the ground.
Thank you. Mr. Mastriano, after the conclusion of the most recent NATO summit in Ankara, the Slovakia Prime Minister reiterated that they would not contribute to NATO's $70 billion military aid package for Ukraine or the EU's $90 billion euro military loan. He has requested that he favors dialogue with Russia, but his approach completely misunderstands what negotiations actually require. It requires leverage. So the only way to create, in my opinion, real leverage over the Kremlin is to ensure Ukraine has the support it needs. So tell me how you're going to navigate this.
Thank you, Senator, for that good question. I do appreciate it. Slovakia is in a difficult position. I estimate, according to my research, I'm not read on anymore, so maybe I'm wrong, but it's about a quarter of its energy is from Russian oil and gas. So that gives continued leverage to Moscow, and I think that's painted Prime Minister Fico into a corner. Additionally, his economy is stagnated, I think largely because of the tariff war. Of course, Slovakia is the #1 per capita car producer in the world, and they rely upon exports for that, largely to the United States, and this is causing a problem. So the point is we need Slovakia to get on board here to keep the pressure up on Russia. As a strategist and a professional soldier, it's incredible what Ukraine has done in turning the tide of the war. And we have a great opportunity here. Our friends in the Baltic region and in Eastern Europe are concerned any victory for Russia will result in their decline. So a success for us in Ukraine, a success for all the countries, including Slovakia.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Bloom, in early June, a ceasefire agreement was reached between Israel and Lebanon to end hostilities. Under the terms of the U.S. mediated agreement, the ceasefire is contingent upon a complete cessation of Hezbollah fire and evacuation of Hezbollah operatives from southern Lebanon. Pilot zones are being created in which the Lebanese armed forces can take exclusive control as Israel forces withdrawal. Do you agree that Israel has a right to defend itself, and so does Lebanon, and respond to Hezbollah violations of the agreement?
Absolutely, I agree that Israel has a right to defend itself there, as well as the Lebanese government. Yes.
So what do you think about the ceasefire? Do you think it's going to last? Do you think it's going to work?
I think it's very important to find a way forward on Lebanon. I think it's a moment because of Israel's military successes against Hezbollah, because of the weaker position that Iran is in and their ability to maintain its support for Hezbollah, that it's a moment we have to test and see what we can do to find a way forward in a very difficult situation. Success is far from guaranteed on that, but I fully support the engagement on it, the now 6th round of talks that we've had to try to find something that works on a very important problem that will provide security both for Israel and ultimately for Lebanon.
I think it's a big deal. If they can get security and get rid of Hezbollah, and allow Lebanese people to live the life they want to live along with the Israelis without all this fighting, it'd be unbelievable. So I hope you'll do everything you can to make sure it succeeds.
Thank you. I will.
Let's break down a Senate Foreign Relations Committee hearing to confirm Douglas Mastriano as the United States ambassador to Slovakia. Senators questioned him for over an hour, and underneath the sparring were 2 separate questions that every ambassador nominee faces. Is this person qualified and steady enough to represent America abroad? And is this the right person for this particular post at this particular moment? Those aren't the same question, and the hearing tangled them together. Here's the frame. The senators questioning him, largely from the Democratic side, pressed on 2 things. First, temperament and record, whether his past public statements and controversies make him a credible face for the country. Second, the posting itself, Slovakia as a NATO ally in a very sensitive spot, and they questioned whether he's suited to the delicate diplomacy the moment requires. His defenders pointed to his long military service and academic credentials. So set the 2 lenses side by side. The credentials lens asks whether the nominee has the experience to do the job. The temperament lens asks whether his judgment and past statements fit the role of a diplomat. This breakdown checks each against the record, not the heat of a single exchange. 1 ground rule up front. This is a politically charged nomination, so we'll keep it narrow and factual. We're not here to relitigate old political fights. We're checking specific verifiable things, what an ambassador actually does, the nominee's record, the strategic situation in Slovakia, and the concerns senators raised. The goal is clarity, not a verdict on the man. Start with the job itself, because a lot of the disagreement comes from different ideas of what an ambassador is for. An ambassador is the president's personal representative to a foreign country, the single official who speaks for the United States on the ground. The job is part diplomat, part manager of an embassy, and part relationship builder with a foreign government. Crucially, ambassadors need Senate confirmation, which is why the senators get this one chance to weigh in before the nominee is sent abroad. And here's a fact that frames the whole debate. Roughly a third of U.S. ambassadors are political appointees rather than career diplomats, and that's been true under presidents of both parties for a long time. So a nominee coming from politics or the military rather than the foreign service is completely normal. The real question isn't whether he's an outsider, it's whether he's a good one. There's an honest tension inside that tradition, though. Career diplomats spend decades learning a country's language, history, and back channels, And critics of the political appointee system say those postings sometimes go to donors or allies who lack that depth. Defenders say an outsider can bring energy, White House access, and fresh perspective. Both are true, which is why this argument recurs with almost every administration. It also helps to understand the confirmation itself. The committee votes first, then the full Senate. A nominee can clear on a party line vote, stall in committee, or get polled if support collapses. So a rough hearing doesn't automatically sink a nominee, and a smooth one doesn't guarantee confirmation. The hearing is the public test. The votes are the private math. So keep that in mind as the fight unfolds. This isn't a debate between senators who want good diplomacy and a nominee who doesn't. Everyone says they want America well represented and its alliances strong. The disagreement is about whether this specific nominee with this specific record serves that goal or puts it at risk. Now the posting, because Slovakia is not a quiet, low-stakes assignment right now, it sits on a fault line. Here's the strategic picture. Slovakia is a member of both NATO and the European Union, and it shares a border with Ukraine, which means it sits right at the edge of Europe's biggest security crisis in a generation. Whatever an American ambassador does, there ripples into the alliance and into the war next door. It's a small country in a very consequential spot. And the politics there add another layer. Slovakia's current government has, at times, been more skeptical of aid to Ukraine and warmer toward Russia than many of its NATO partners. That makes the American ambassador's job delicate, keeping an ally close, defending shared commitments, and navigating a government that doesn't always see the war the way Washington does. This is advanced diplomacy, not a ceremonial post. A little geography makes the stakes concrete. When the war next door sent millions of refugees fleeing, many crossed into Slovakia and its neighbors, and NATO supplies for Ukraine moved through this corridor. So the country isn't a bystander to the conflict, it's a logistical and humanitarian front line. An ambassador there is managing a relationship that touches the war every single day. There's also the alliance principle underneath it all. NATO's core promise is that an attack on one member is treated as an attack on all, which is what has kept the peace in Europe for decades. Every ambassador to a NATO country is, in a small way, a caretaker of that promise. That's why senators treat even a mid-sized posting as serious. The credibility of the whole alliance is made of many small relationships like this one. So, weigh the posting honestly. Supporters can fairly say a nominee with military and NATO experience understands the security environment well. Critics can fairly say that a moment this delicate calls for a steady, uncontroversial diplomat, not someone whose past statements could become the story. Both points are legitimate, and they pull in opposite directions. There's one more piece of context that makes this posting extra sensitive right now. The United States and its European allies are in a constant, careful conversation about how much to help Ukraine and how to hold the alliance together under strain. An ambassador in a wavering member state is part of that conversation every day, nudging, reassuring, and reporting back. Send the wrong signal, and a crack in the alliance can widen. So let's take the defense of the nominee first, and take it seriously, because the credentials are real. Douglas Mastriano is a retired Army colonel with roughly 30 years of service, including postings in Europe connected to NATO, and he holds a doctorate in history. On paper, that's a serious record, real military experience, real time on the continent, and real academic training. The Republican senators, including Pete Ricketts and Rick Scott, pointed to exactly this, and it's a fair starting point. There's also a legitimate small d democratic argument here. Elections have consequences, and a president is generally entitled to pick his own representatives abroad, subject to the Senate's check. Unless a nominee is clearly unfit or unqualified, the traditional deference is to let a president staff his own foreign policy team. That principle applies no matter which party holds the White House. And his supporters make a substantive point about the region. Someone who has studied European military history and served on the continent may genuinely understand the stakes on NATO's eastern flank better than a generalist. In a posting defined by security and the war next door, that background isn't just decoration, it's arguably relevant expertise. That's the strongest version of the case for him. He also brings elected experience as a state legislator, which supporters frame as a plus. He knows how to build coalitions, take public positions, and answer to constituents, skills that can translate to representing a country. Critics see the same political career as the source of the controversies. It's the same resume line, read two completely different ways, and where you land on it colors the whole nomination. Now the case the Democratic senators pressed, and it wasn't mainly about his resume, it was about judgment and past statements. Their core worry is that an ambassador is a symbol as much as an administrator. He carries the country's credibility. Senators pointed to the nominee's controversial public record, including his past statements about the 2020 election and his presence in Washington around the events of January 6, and argued that such a record could undermine his credibility as America's representative abroad. Whatever you conclude, that's a legitimate line of questioning for this job. It's worth being precise and fair here. The nominee has said he left the capital area before events turned unlawful that day, and he was not charged with any crime. The senator's point wasn't a legal accusation. It was a judgment call about optics and credibility, whether a foreign government and public would see him as a steady, unifying representative of the United States. That's a question of diplomacy, not law. Here's why foreign optics matter more than they might seem. Ambassadors are studied closely by the government they're posted to, which reads every past statement for signals about what Washington really thinks. A representative seen as a lightning rod can become a distraction, where the story is about him rather than the message he's supposed to carry. Several senators were essentially asking whether he could avoid becoming the story. On the academic side, his doctorate drew both respect and scrutiny. A history PhD is a real credential and shows discipline and expertise. At the same time, questions have been raised over the years about aspects of his scholarship. For a fact check, the fair line is narrow, the degree is real, the debate over the work is a matter of academic opinion, and neither settles whether he'd be a good ambassador. It's context, not a verdict. The senators also pressed on temperament in a diplomatic sense, whether someone known for sharp, combative politics can pivot to the patient, careful, often boring work of diplomacy, where a single careless sentence can strain an alliance. Diplomacy rewards restraint. The fair question they were really asking is whether the skills that win a political fight are the same ones that keep an alliance steady. Often they aren't. Senator Tim Kaine, who has spent years on foreign relations, pressed the substance of the diplomacy, how the nominee would handle the specific tensions in the region and represent U.S. positions to a wary government. His questioning was a reminder that the job is concrete, not symbolic, and that a nominee needs command of the actual issues, not just a compelling life story. Senator Chris Van Hollen focused on credibility and consistency, probing whether the nominee's past positions could be squared with the role of an even-handed representative. It's a fair line because an ambassador who is seen as a partisan figure can find doors quietly closing in a foreign capital. Diplomacy runs on trust, and trust is built or lost on how consistent and credible a person seems. There's a fair historical caveat the critics should acknowledge too. Plenty of ambassadors arrived with sharp reputations and grew into disciplined, effective envoys once the responsibility was real. Past bluntness is a warning sign, not a guarantee of failure, and the confirmation process itself, the public commitments made under oath, can bind behavior once someone is in the role. People do sometimes rise. So weigh the temperament case fairly. The critics are on solid ground that credibility and restraint matter enormously for an ambassador, and that a controversial record is a legitimate concern for a symbolic post. The fair counter is that past political combat doesn't automatically predict how someone behaves in a disciplined diplomatic role, and plenty of blunt figures have grown into the job. It's a real risk, not a certainty. So let's total it up honestly across the whole hearing. On credentials, the military service, the European postings, and the doctorate are real, and a president's deference to pick his own ambassadors is legitimate. On temperament, the senators are right that credibility and restraint are central to the job, and that a controversial record is a fair concern for a sensitive NATO post. The honest verdict lives in the tension between those two. None of this tells you whether to support the nominee. You can respect a long military career and a doctorate and still worry that a delicate NATO posting needs a low-drama diplomat. You can also believe that a president deserves his picks and that people can rise to a role. Those aren't contradictions, they're the exact trade-off. The Senate exists to weigh one nominee at a time. Give each side its due. The nominee's defenders are right that his experience is real and that presidents get deference. The critics are right that an ambassador is a symbol, that Slovakia is a sensitive post, and that a controversial record is a fair thing to probe. A viewer who holds both understands this hearing better than one who only cheers a side. And here's the reassuring part about the process itself. Whatever you think of the nominee, the fact that senators from a Foreign Relations Committee spent an hour pressing him on his record is the system working, not failing. Confirmation hearings are one of the few real checks on who gets to speak for the country abroad. Even a contentious one is democracy doing its slow, unglamorous job. It also helps to keep the stakes in proportion, in both directions. One ambassador rarely makes or breaks an alliance. The relationship with Slovakia will outlast whoever holds the post. But ambassadors do matter at the margins, in the tone they set and the trust they build or squander. So this is neither a doomsday appointment nor a trivial one. It's a consequential mid-level decision that deserves exactly the scrutiny it got. And notice what almost everyone agreed on underneath. Both sides said they want strong alliances, a secure NATO, and America well represented in a dangerous part of the world. The disagreement is narrow, whether this particular nominee advances those shared goals or complicates them. That's a judgment call, and reasonable senators landed on opposite sides of it. It's worth naming the political weather honestly. On a nomination this charged, some opposition is principled worry about fitness, and some is simply opposition to the president who sent the name up. Likewise, some support is genuine confidence in the nominee, and some is party loyalty. Separating the sincere judgment from the reflexive team play is most of the work in reading a hearing like this one. And step back to what's actually being decided. This isn't a referendum on the man's whole life or his politics. It's a narrow question about one job in one country. A confirmation asks only whether, on balance, sending this person to this post serves the national interest. Keeping that frame narrow is how the Senate does its job well, and how a viewer avoids turning every nomination into a culture war. And a fair word to anyone tempted to dismiss the whole thing as theater. Yes, most senators had likely decided their votes before the first question, but the hearing still forces commitments onto the public record, surfaces concerns a foreign government will read, and lets the country see how a nominee handles pressure. Even a hearing with a predictable ending does real work. The performance and the substance coexist. So where does it leave us? With a nominee whose credentials are genuine and whose record is genuinely contested, up for a posting that genuinely matters. A serious country takes both the experience and the temperament seriously before it hands someone the keys to an embassy on NATO's edge. That's what a confirmation hearing is for, and this one earned its scrutiny. Watch 3 things from here. First, whether the nomination actually advances, since a closely divided committee and floor can stall or approve it, and that vote will tell you how the concerns landed. Second, if confirmed, how he handles the Ukraine aid question with a skeptical Slovak government, the first real test of his diplomacy. And third, whether the controversies that dominated the hearing follow him into the job, or fade once he's actually doing it. Those answers will come on the record. Alliances aren't kept by resumes alone, and they aren't lost by a single hearing. The work is in the quiet, careful diplomacy that follows, in a country most Americans will never think about, but that sits right at the edge of the map that matters. That is where we'll keep watching. That is our breakdown. Stay with us.